Hi everyone, I'm Jackie, co-founder of the Why We Read project. Why We Read exists to bring awareness to National Reading Year by celebrating reading as a human and lifelong experience and showing that reading does not come with any rules. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Amirah, who has background in writing, teaching, and I saw some publishing as well, maybe some
Yeah,
agenting and marketing.
a little bit.
So before we hop in, Amira, could you tell us a little more about everything that you've done and who you are?
My name's Amirah. I am a currently teaching professional. I work in higher education. I teach composition and literature as well as public speaking. So, you know, always thinking about reading and how to get people more engaged in literacy, because it can be really hard out here sometimes, especially to get students to read. But we look for fun ways to get it done and to improve that. I also am a writer. I have my MFA from William Patterson University. And yeah, I had a short stint in publishing. I was in publishing for about 4 years. Didn't quite work out, wasn't for me, but here we are. Now I'm a teacher and I'm loving it every single day.
That's amazing. Everyone finds their path, and I think all of your paths were connected, so I'm not surprised you end up amazing where you are now. So we're going down memory lane. My first question is, what drew you to books and storytelling when you were growing up? So, when you were a child, how did you discover this love for reading?
Yeah, I was the first child on both sides of my family, and my parents were really, really young. When they had me, they were 20. I grew up in a multi-generational home, so my dad still lived at home, and all his siblings were at home too. Obviously, my mom lived with us as well. But my parents, when they were out working, my aunts and uncles, who were teenagers at the time, would sit down and read with me from a really young age. So some of my earliest memories were like sitting in the house and like sitting in their laps and reading a book. And as I grew up, all my siblings are much younger than me, all my cousins are much younger than me, so it was always just me by myself and my books. And so I'd always just be reading off in my little world. Like at school during recess, I'd be the one kid who's like, "Can I go to the library, please?" Like, and I would just sit there like the whole hour by myself, like reading and looking at books. I loved the Magic Tree House books. Those were like I call them spark books, like books that make you really interested in what you're doing. I have a teaching friend who calls when you get a good book like the sink, because you sink into your chair because you're so invested in it. Um, and I think I get that a lot still. Like I am someone who I'm so sparked by reading. I sink into my chair a lot when I'm reading. I get so invested in that world and I love it so much.
We talk a lot right now in terms of literacy in the American home and how behaviors between different family members operate now versus how they did a couple of years ago, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And there's a lot of research that shows that people aren't reading as much with the kids at home. I want to pick your brain a little bit, I guess, philosophically. Do you think that you see evidence of that with your students now as members of the younger generation?
I think so. My best friend works with little kids. Like she's an ESL teacher for first and second grade, and that's a really big problem that she's running into at home. Like she'll tell me like a lot of parents either are not invested in their kids' homework or are like, I don't read with my kids or they don't want to read with their kids. And so I think the literacy crisis is almost bigger than our younger generation. A lot of adults seem to have a bad relationship with reading, and so that bad relationship is trickling into their children's relationship with reading. Whether it's they're forced to read a book or they find it boring or they're just so busy. Um, but then on the flip side, because of this sort of lack, there's this like increased interest but fear. And so I find a lot of my students who are usually between 18 to 25, like, which is ironically around my age as well. I'm 26. But like I do notice my students will be like very interested in literature, but really intimidated by literature. And so a lot of the time they're like, Professor, how do I start? Like, what do I do? Where do I go? And so I've started giving them reading lists to sort of help them at least see like the basics of literature, the things that they should know.
How do you come up with those reading lists?
So a lot of the time I base it around the core concepts of what we're learning in class. In my composition too, which is mostly like classic literature focused, I try to think of the global literature that I read and the global literature that I read from a young age. And surprisingly, a lot of my students have not read things like The Great Gatsby. They do not know anything by Hemingway. They have no idea what anything I present them means. And so I was like, okay, what are to me foundational texts? And what are some foundational texts that are not just by old white men from 1805? um, and so I personally, although I do have a lot of respect for classical literature and those works that tend to be by old white men, I think a lot of them are well-written works. I think there's just more than that, and the perspective should be larger than that. And so I will also think about what are foundational works when I was doing my degree that opened me up to literature beyond the classic scope in America, and what are books that I personally wish I was assigned. And so that's how I created my reading list. I try to give a global perspective, a diverse perspective. I always tell my students we're taking a trip around the world in our class because we're going to read from everything and learn about everything and look at how the world is all connected through writing. And so that supplemental literature is connected to that sort of trip that we take.
One of the questions that we like to ask is when you meet someone who says, I'm not a reader, reading's not for me, I'm too busy, I just can't get into it, we like to take it one step further and think, okay, what's the psychology behind that? And I love that you brought up that there's almost a sense of fear or intimidation. Maybe or things that we should do. And all of that coming together, it can really make someone overwhelmed.
It's true. I mean, I think it's so interesting because I feel like book talk is really huge right now. Um, and there are good and bad things to that. Like, I do think book talk commodifies books a little bit and sort of makes it like a fashion trend in a way. But at the same time, it is getting people reading again and picking up books. And so we're seeing people have this reinvigorated interest. And it's kind of like being a part of a book club. And so I think when there's communal feels to things, people tend to feel a little less of that fear and intimidation, which happens in a classroom, but it also happens in real life. Like there are silent reading clubs now, which are really fun, and you just go to like a bar or a cafe and you get to read, and there's other people reading too, and like you get to talk a little bit. And I think that removes some of the fear also. Um, but when people tell me that, I do try to press them a little bit. I will be like, well, do you never read? You've never read an email? Like, I like to tease them a little bit about it, but then I also like to see like where that comes from. And a lot of the time it is trauma is a really strong word, but it is like a very minor trauma received from like high school readings where they're like, I hated that. And I'm like, yeah, but you can like other stuff, right? Like there's other books in the world. There's action books, there's westerns, there's all these types of books that are I've recently discovered food horror. I don't know if you've seen that nook in Barnes and Nobles. The coziest little like looking covers, and they're like horror mysteries, and they're like this big. They're so tiny. They have the coolest little covers, and they're like horrors based around these women who just love food and are doing their little thing. And they're so intriguing to me, and they're so fun. I think it's so fun. And they have like these quirky names like the Pie Mystery Series. And then each like book is like the Blueberry Pie Murder or something. Like it's so funny. But there's like something for everybody. Magazines are a form of reading. We should really get back to the magazine. I love a magazine. I think they're great. There's reading for everyone.
Yeah, there's a bookmate out there, I think, for everyone. Doesn't matter what it is.
No, I agree. I think it's really interesting. Like, I had a friend who told me recently, I'm really like wanting to read again and I want to be well read. And she's like, every time you speak, I can tell you're well read, but I don't know how to do it. And I was like, have you ever thought of like trying short stories? And she was like, no, I never, because, short story, I was like, a short story can be like 50 pages or less. Like, just read some short stories. I can send you short stories. And like that blew her mind that it could be that accessible, that like a 5-page short story still counts. Like, of course it counts. Everything counts.
Yeah, I think everybody imagines when you tell them, oh, you should read more, they're thinking of like, I don't know, a raisin in the sun. They're like,
Yes.
no, not again.
No, they're literally like, they're thinking you're telling them to go read like Dostoevsky or something. Like, you don't have to do that.
Take a breath. There is a format out there for everyone. And I like what you said. I agree with it wholeheartedly, which is that you could read a short story, you can read a magazine, you can read a book, you can go read poetry, you can read your email. It's still kind of reading, especially if you get those long saga ones like me. We can put that on
Exactly.
your list.
It counts.
So tell me a little bit more about what you're reading now. How has your reading changed over the past 3 to 4 years? Because you've slid into a new profession.
Yeah, I think publishing really killed my drive for reading. Like, being in corporate was so stressful for me. It was like not natural to my body rhythm. Commuting into New York City from New Jersey was really stressful. It was like 3 to 5 hours of my day, depending on how many delays there were. Um, and so, when you're feeling that level of stress, it's really hard to enjoy anything in your life. I wasn't watching things, I wasn't reading things. Like, it was hard. Like, the only things I was reading were for work, honestly. And, that made me feel like, I guess part of my French, but like it made me feel really shitty because I love to read and I missed it. And I was like, oh, like, this sucks. This sucks that I can't read. Um, but now it's like my whole schedule has changed and being a professor is much more flexible, but also like I have more time to build in and space for reading. So my goal now is like 2 books a month. And I have a book club that I'm a part of with people from my MFA. So like that at least forces me to get one book in, Um, and then the second book is like, just my free read. And that has been really restorative for me. It has made me like books again. It's renewed my hope in my own literacy. um, I'm like, I won't be part of this statistic. And then during the semester, like, I'm constantly reading and rereading these things that I assign and trying to find new things to assign, things that I'm interested in that I want my students to read because, if I'm not familiar with the work, they can tell. Students can smell fear. So,
Will you tell us a little bit more about your book club and also introduce what a book club is for someone who might not know?
so my book club specifically is just me and a bunch of my peers who we did my MFA together. We have a couple stragglers who are teachers at the college I teach at, and we basically are a group of 6 women. We get together every month and we vote on a book that we're going to read. Um, each month we have one person like compile a list of books that they want to read, and then we all vote on which one. So that's really fun. And then during the actual book club session, we discuss the last book that we read, and then we personally meet every 5 or 6 weeks, I think it is. And so we do that cycle where in those 6 weeks we read the book, we take our notes, we do all the stuff, and then when we meet, we have like discussion. The person whose book pick it was brings questions for everybody and leads the discussion, so we take turns. Sometimes there's snacks, sometimes there's not. Just depends. I personally always have a coffee. I'm very coffee obsessed. It's really fun, and if you've never done a book club before, there are different types of book clubs. Some people do. I mentioned it earlier, but the silent read book club. So that's basically like you just get in a group of people and you all read together. And then some silent read book clubs do like discussion at the end or like mix and mingles. A lot of book clubs usually have that like assigned book and then you discuss it at the end and then vote on the next book type situation. So yeah, I love book club. It really keeps me accountable.
So I'm hearing book club is extra fun because it keeps you social for an activity that a lot of people think might be introverted. It also keeps you accountable. So if you have that goal of reading books, you'll finally have a couple people that are there to motivate you to stay on track. And also, it sounds like you might be exposed to more books than you predicted you could be because you're coming together with people who might have different ideas of what is good to read. So, you take away that decision of, okay, I have to pick something from the shelf. Wait, somebody else can do it. And you're reading something again that's totally out of your normal sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Like everyone in my book club, we all love reading different things. And because a lot of us are academics, sometimes the things that we're reading are very applicable to their projects. One person in my book club, she does like she's doing a thesis on medicine and mental health and how like chronic illness is affected by doctors, by mental health, by all these other different factors and the people you talk to. And so her book club picks tend to be surrounding that. I never would have read that on my own. I was like, oh, a medicine pick. I don't know what to do with that. But it was a really good book. It was a really harrowing book that she picked, but it was really good. Um, and then this month the person who picked she just loves romance, and so she had a whole list of romance books. Um, One of my very close she's a mentor of mine and like a friend, Mary Lou. She loves witches and witchcraft, and she practices a little bit, and so she picks like all these really witchy, like cool, fun books. So she's got me hooked on those. And then we have Brenda, who's amazing, and Brenda's very eclectic. And so her book picks tend to just be like really out of the blue. You can never predict her.
So you're all academics and you've all done a thesis or dissertation at some point. Is that right?
Hmm.
So beautifully said, Amira. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. And to our listeners, you can visit the whywereadproject.com to learn more. Don't forget to like and follow us here on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok at Why We Read Project so you can join the reading revolution. Find out how to participate and inspire others with your reading journey. Tell me more about the relationship between being a writer and reading.
Mm. You know, I think like sometimes as writers, we don't think about how important reading can be to our craft, but the worst writing I've ever produced was in times that I wasn't reading. And my MFA professors used to say this all the time. You can't be a writer if you're not a reader. And it's true because we learn from each other. And I try to tell this to my students now too. Like, I sound like my professors. It's like that issue where you get older and you sound like your mom. Like, I became a professor and now I sound like my professors. I'm like, guys, you can't write things if you haven't read them. Um, and it's true. It's true because you learn how to write in a genre from reading the people who write in that genre. And you learn how to use language by seeing how other people use language. There's so many times when I'm reading that there's like a turn of phrase or a word that's used, and it blows my mind. I'm like, never would have thought to put that word there. And then when you go into practice, now I find myself using that word in ways that I might not have thought to try, or trying to think of different ways to phrase things. And it kind of pushes your creativity and your boundaries. It's like how Michael Jackson used to write songs before he slept because he thought Prince would get them in his dreams. Like, as a writer, you got to be on it, man, or else somebody's going to take your book, Like, that's how I feel sometimes. I'm like, oh my God, I got to get this all out of my brain. And then you're reading a book that is like just so amazing that you're like, God, I wish that came to me, Um, And you have to be engaged. It's like with anything, you know. Um, if you're a scientist, you always have to be involved in the research. If you're in finance, you have to be looking at the numbers. You're going to conferences. Like every field requires you to be involved in your field, right? And you can't write books if you're not reading books. Otherwise, you're out of tune with your field, right? And what it is it becomes ego, honestly.
Would you like to share more about things that you're writing now or things that are potentially coming up for publication?
Sure. I just sent out for submission some poems. I wouldn't call myself a good poet, even if maybe other people would. But, I write poetry because it's an emotional outlet for me. So I write it, and then the good thing to do with the writer is to send it out. So, that might be coming up. And then I'm also working on my debut novel, which is sort of a women's lit. It's about an eclectic group of POC who are working in like really hard entertainment industries in New York and trying to get their lives together, falling in and out of love. It's a little 90s, rom-com, sitcom-esque. But I think it's going to be really fun, and I'm really hoping that'll be out in the world in the next few years.
Final question. After everything we've spoken about, personally and culturally, tell us why. Why do you read?
I love how you said it. It was so good. Um, I read because reading enriches my life, honestly. It makes my life better. It stimulates my brain. It makes me think better. It makes me a better writer. Um, like it genuinely just improves my life. And I love that feeling that, that Mary Lou said, like that sync. When you're in that book and you're just like, you're in it, you can see it, you can feel it. Like, there really is nothing like that for me. And I don't know who I would be if I wasn't a reader or a writer. Like, it's just who I am.